Okay, so today I got the M1 Pro 14-inch MacBook Pro. So I got the Pro with 10 cores CPU and 16 cores GPU. So this is not the base model, but it's just a step above the base model. And I want to run some, I've been seeing lots and lots of benchmarks run on these really high-end MacBooks with the M1 Max, maxed out to 64 gigabytes, and most people are not going to get that, right? Most people need some power, but not that much power. So I want to run some benchmarks on this M1 Pro, which is just one step above the baseline, to see how it does relative to my 2019 MacBook Pro. So I have a 16-inch 2019 Intel MacBook Pro, and I basically paid the same amount for this 14-inch as I did for that 16-inch, which I could have gotten a 16-inch for this price, but I really wanted something that's more compact. When I need more screen real estate, I can plug up to my 32-inch 4K monitor and get all the real estate that I need. But what I wanted was something that's relatively portable that I can bring around with me. And that has good battery life. Now the battery life on this is not as good as it is on the 16-inch M1 MacBook Pro. But it's way more than a working day. So this has 17 hours, it's rated as by Apple as having 17 hours battery life. The 16-inch M1 MacBook Pro is rated as having 21 hours of battery life. So 21 minus 17 is what, 4. So 4 more hours. That's not enough to make up for the lack of portability. I want something that I can actually sit in my car while I'm in the passenger side and do some computing or surf the net or whatever. So the first benchmark that I'm going to run is something called Browser Bench. Now, Browser Bench is a quick and dirty way. If you go to browserbench.org, they have a couple of tests. There's Jetstream 2, Motion Mark, and Speedometer. The test that I'm going to run is Speedometer. So I'm going to run this test now. And Speedometer usually the score on Speedometer is highly correlated with the single core performance. At least I believe it's highly correlated with the single core performance. So we should be able to get a good feel of how fast the single core chip is by the benchmarks. So this just scored 273. 273 is the highest score that I've ever seen on a laptop for Browser Bench. I'm just going to run that again to make sure that it wasn't a fluke, because usually even with the M1 MacBook Pro scored around 220, 230. And just for some context, my 16-inch MacBook Pro scores about 130, somewhere in that range. Okay, again, we have a score of 278. So now I'm gonna run some benchmarks for my 16-inch MacBook Pro, just so you can see the difference between the 16-inch MacBook Pro and this for the browser bench, for the speedometer browser bench test. So next I'm going to run Geekbench. Geekbench is a really quick and dirty way of getting a feel for how powerful a laptop is. So just for some context, my 16-inch MacBook Pro, my Intel MacBook Pro, scores about 950 to 1,000 on the single core Geekbench. And I expect this to score much higher than that. I expect it to score 1,700 because that's what it scored. That's what the MacBook M1 score is, and essentially this is a bunch of MacBook M1 cores strung together, as I understand it. So I'm running Geekbench right now on this laptop, and I'm going to run it on the 16-inch MacBook Pro to get us, so that we have an idea of just how powerful it is in comparison to this laptop. Okay, so this laptop scored 1776 on the single core, which is what I expected. Now, what is a bit above my expectations is the multi-core score, which is 12,495. The last time I ran this test, it was 11,000 something. And just to put things in perspective, the 16-inch MacBook Pro that I spent probably $2,500 on about a year and a half ago, the multi-core score for it is around 6,900 or 7,000. So this is not quite twice as fast as that in multi-core. I'm gonna run what are called compute benchmarks using metal. That gives you an idea of how powerful the graphics card is. This is totally unscripted, by the way. I usually don't script stuff. So this is just me talking and thinking off the top of my head about ways that we can test the performance of this laptop relative to my 16-inch MacBook Pro from Intel. Okay, so this got a metal score of 41,863. For some context, my 16-inch MacBook Pro, I believe it scores 21,000. I'm not sure. I'll have to run some tests to see. I have to run that test to see. So the next test is Cinebench. Now, my MacBook Pro, I think on multi-core, it scores about, I want to say it scores about 7,000 on multi-core. for Cinebench, 7 or 8,000. This laptop scores 11,765. I'm gonna see if I can run a quick test here. No, there's no such thing as a quick Cinebench test. It takes 10 minutes to run. But overall, this is pretty impressive. So you have a laptop here that is essentially twice as fast as the same as a 16-inch laptop from 2 years ago. It's the same price, but it's about twice as fast, or almost twice as fast. In graphics, it's impressive. 41,000 for the metal score, when the laptop that I had before scores like 21,000. As a matter of fact, let me verify that. Okay, so running Geekbench, actually this laptop is twice as fast as this one. The single core is 1073, as opposed to 1700 on this, 1700. And the multi-core is 6585, so it's not even 7,000, as opposed to 12,000 on this laptop. So 6 goes into 12 2 times. So it's approximately twice as fast from the multi-core perspective. Very impressive. So just to put things into perspective, if you are looking at buying one of the new MacBook Pros, it is worth it if you want to improve on the performance of your earlier MacBook Pro, because this MacBook Pro is the latest one before this one. So from 2019 to 2021, that's just 2 years, but it's doubling the performance at the same price. And it's also getting much, much better battery life.